I'm moving into the street of London. Let's bring in my colleague, Juliana Olainka. Good morning, Juliana.
Good morning, Chimaze.
Our ministers are to discuss a review of the UK's coronavirus lockdown to consider whether restrictions on people's movements should be extended. Do you see them considering lifting the lockdown, perhaps because of the Easter holiday?
Well, in short, absolutely not. There's no end in sight in Britain for lockdown measures to be restricted. However, of course, there will be a series of emergency meetings by the Cobra cabinet because before just the day, actually, that Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced these measures, he did promise that there would be a 3-week review, and that's enshrined into law. So we are expecting an announcement after the bank holiday weekend. I think there are concerns amongst health authorities here in Britain because, as many of our viewers will know, the weather is never great for a long period of time in the UK, and it has been pretty sunny. And we are going into the Easter bank holiday weekend, and there are concerns that some people may flout those measures and flout the rules. We are allowed to have 1 dose of daily exercise per day, but authorities do not want Britons to take advantage of that, and that's really because of the death rate. Just yesterday, the death rate was staggering. Over 938 people had died, which is higher than the daily peak we've actually seen in Italy. There are concerns that, in fact, the death toll in the UK could be the highest in Europe. So we certainly haven't reached our peak. And at the start of the lockdown, a lot of the scientists were saying that they won't be following sentiment when it comes to lifting lockdown measures. It will be purely based on data and science. There had been some suggestions earlier this week that the peak could be Sunday, and until the peak comes, there'll be no discussion of whether or not a lockdown will be removed. So we're expecting that decision after the Easter bank holiday weekend before Friday.
All right, now, Chancellor Rishi Sunak has announced a £750 million package to keep struggling charities afloat during this pandemic. What does this package involve?
Well, this was a long time coming, of course. There have been so many different industries, agencies, groups of people that complained that they had been left out of the first dose of government packages, which came over 3 weeks ago now, of £350 billion. The charity sector is one of them. Britain, they're known as being pretty charitable people. There are so many events that happen across the country, at schools, marathon events, and of course, these aren't taking place. So there were concerns from charity chiefs across the country that they would be facing a £4 billion black hole if they didn't receive a bailout from Rishi Sunak. He did that yesterday, £750 million. It's really going to be split into 2 halves. The first half of about £350 million will go towards charities that work with government agencies, so they'll be receiving the bulk of the fund. And the second half will be helping charities that work with the community. And so these are people that typically run food banks, help those who are less capable of helping themselves. And so some people have welcomed those measures, although there has been a lot of outcry from opposition Labour Party members, as well as some other senior figures in the charity. They think that money's just not enough. They said the fact that they asked for £4 billion and they were given £750 million is just a fraction of that. They used the example of the London Marathon, which is really important. That would probably be taking place this weekend or next, which of course has been cancelled. Just that one event alone raises £66 million, mainly for charity companies. So they use that as an example to say that they need more.
Right, and an interesting one I saw today. Now, while job losses loom across the globe, fruit pickers and farm workers are being sought after. Our data from job search engines shows that record numbers of people in the UK are looking for farming jobs. Why the rush to the farms?
Well, there are two reasons, really. The first one is the fact that, of course, COVID-19 has caused hundreds of thousands of people to become jobless overnight because of the closure of all of these businesses. And the second thing is that Britain's, some authorities in Britain have evoked this kind of war-like patriotic spirit of picking the food to save the masses. So you've got two sorts of people who are involved in this. Typically, food picking is a seasonal job for migrants that typically come from Europe, but they haven't been coming. And it's not just because the borders are closed, but some people have been struggling with the sharp fall of the pound. The euro is not worth as much as it used to be with the pound, and so they don't see the point in coming. But of course, COVID-19 is the main reason. I think there was one recruitment agency that saw a spike of up to 83%, so a record-breaking 18,000 Brits have applied to be pickers, but the agricultural company are just saying, the sector are saying it's not enough, that typically during this period they would see about 88,000 workers. So, you know, if there is anybody sitting at home that does feel it's safe to come out and wants a job, then, you know, the recruiters are desperate to try and get you.
Interesting. All right, we'll look out for an update from you later in the day. Thank you, Juliana.
Thank you.
And let's look at some of these reports coming in from some international organizations. The economic fallout from the coronavirus could increase global poverty by as much as $500 million. Now, this bleak warning comes from a United Nations study into the financial and human costs of the pandemic. The report says it will be the first time that poverty has increased globally in 30 years. The findings come ahead of key meetings of the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and G20 finance ministers next week. The report, which estimates a 400 to 600 million increase in the number of people in poverty across the globe, says the potential impact of the virus poses a real challenge to the UN Sustainable Development Goal of ending poverty by 2030. According to this report, by the time the pandemic is over, half of the world's population of 7.8 billion people could be living in poverty. About 40% of the new poor could be concentrated in East Asia and the Pacific, with about 1/3 in both Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Earlier this week, more than 100 global organizations called for debt payments to be waived this year for developing countries, which would free up $25 billion in cash to support their economies. In the meantime, in estimates unveiled on Wednesday, the World Trade Organization economists project world merchandise trade volumes this year will fall by between 13% and 32%. Their calculations are subject to uncertainty about how COVID-19 and its economic impact will evolve. But to put these figures in perspective, the report says the optimistic scenario will be worse than the 12% drop seen at the height of the global financial crisis in 2008 and 2009. The pessimistic scenario would be on par with the fall in world trade seen during the first 3 years of the Great Depression from 1929 to 1932. WTO's Director General says even as the crisis rages, governments must start planning for its aftermath. On the economic front, this means laying the foundations for a strong and socially inclusive recovery. Trade and international coordination more generally will be important ingredients here. According to him, the positive news is that a strong recovery is possible. The fundamentals of the economy remain solid, even though the fuel line to the engine has been cut off. He is calling on world leaders to make good policy decisions and give businesses, households, and would-be entrepreneurs reasons to be confident about the future. WTO economists estimate that if the pandemic is brought under control relatively soon, trade and output could potentially rebound nearly to their pre-pandemic trajectory as early as 2021. And on the global oil market, prices rose in early trade today On expectations, the world's largest oil producers would agree to cut production at a meeting later in the day as the industry grapples with a coronavirus-driven collapse in global oil demand. Brent crude futures rose 1.2% to $33.25 a barrel. The contract rose to an intraday high of $33.90, climbing for a second day. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures were up 3.3% to $25.91 a barrel after earlier climbing by as much as 6.1%. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and Allies, including Russia, a group known as OPEC+, are set to convene a video conference meeting today. Now, the meeting is expected to be more successful than their gathering in March, where they failed to agree to extend supply cuts and triggered a price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia. And with that, we'll draw the curtain on today's edition of the program. Thank you for watching. I'm Chimezi Obi. You're welcome.